The coupe stank of feathers, rot, and cruelty. Abigail pressed her knees into the straw-strewn floor, her dress torn at the hem where the deacon's wife had yanked it, declaring her cursed, useless, and unfit for any man's legacy. The words still echoed through her head louder than the clucks around her. Barren. That's all it took in Millstone Creek. One doctor's letter and a decade of trying without result. And suddenly she was no longer a wife, no longer a woman, just a burden. Her husband Amos had walked her to the church gate in silence, handed the letter to the Reverend, and turned away without a word. The Reverend's wife called it God's will. The townsfolk called it charity, letting her stay in the coop out back instead of casting her into the wild. But Abigail knew what it really was. Punishment. At night, she covered herself with feed sacks and tried not to cry when the wind cut through the wooden slats. Each morning, the children dared each other to toss pebbles at the chicken lady. She hadn't spoken in days. There was no one to speak to, until the day the rider came. She saw him through the narrow cracks in the wood. Tall, broad-shouldered, his duster coated in dust. The kind of man who didn't stop in Millstone unless he had business or grief. He dismounted slow, his boots crunching on gravel as he tied his horse to the church rail. Abigail's heart stuttered. Not because she knew him, because he didn't look away. He looked at her. Right through the boards, their eyes met, hers wide with shame, his quiet and unreadable. She turned her face. Shame burned worse than hunger. Moments later, she heard voices. "She's barren," the Reverend's wife was saying. "We did all we could. The coop keeps her safe. You know how men talk." "I know," the stranger replied, voice low as thunder on the horizon. "I'm not like other men." "She was married," the woman pressed. "She failed him." A pause. "Maybe he failed her." The words settled like dust. Abigail dared another glance. The man stood at the coop door now. "What's your name?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "Abigail." He nodded once. "I'm Samuel Wren, widow. My ranch needs a cook, not a womb. If you'd like to stand up and leave with me, I won't stop you." She stared, unmoving. Could she believe it? Or was this another kind of trap? But something in his voice didn't ask. It offered. And Abigail, trembling, reached for the latch. The townsfolk watched in silence as Samuel helped her onto his horse. No one tried to stop them. No one offered a farewell. The Reverend's wife stood on the chapel steps, arms crossed, lips pressed into a line, but she said nothing. Even the children who had once giggled and thrown corn husks at the coop now stared like they were witnessing something unnatural. Maybe they were. Abigail had not walked through the front of town since the day Amos left her at the church gates. And now she sat behind a stranger. No, not a stranger. Samuel Wren. A name whispered on the wind, a rancher who hadn't been seen since the fever took his wife and baby 3 winters back. He hadn't been looking for company. That much was clear. But here he was, riding out with the woman the town had discarded. Abigail's fingers trembled as they gripped the saddle. She didn't speak. Neither did he. It wasn't awkward. It was holy. The horse moved slow at first, as if even it understood the weight of this moment. Every hoofbeat seemed to ask, "Are you sure? Are you sure?" She didn't know what she was sure of. Only that Samuel hadn't flinched when she'd opened the coop door, dirt-caked and silent. He had extended his hand without judgment, like a man handing bread to someone hungry without needing to ask why. The prairie opened before them, wide and endless. The further they rode, the more the weight on Abigail's shoulders began to shift. Not vanish, but shift. After a while, her body leaned into his back, not out of need, but out of something stranger. Trust. He didn't react, didn't glance back. just rode steady towards the horizon, where the wind smelled cleaner and the sky looked more like a beginning than an end. They reached his land by dusk. It was sprawling, but not grand. A fence needed mending. The barn roof sagged in one corner. The house was simple, wooden, square, with a porch that faced sunrise. He dismounted, then turned to lift her down. She hesitated. Her feet hadn't touched the ground without fear in so long. It felt like betrayal. "You're safe here," Samuel said, his voice quiet. "Not because I say so, because you decide it." That stopped her. She looked at him, really looked, and saw no pity, just a man offering peace without strings. She stepped down. The earth met her feet like an old friend. Inside the house, a fire already burned, and outside, the coupe was a memory being carried away by wind. The cabin smelled of pine ash and worn leather, with shelves full of mismatched tin cups and a rocking chair that creaked when the wind pushed through the cracked window pane. Abigail stood just inside the door, unsure whether to move, speak, or simply breathe. Samuel took off his coat, hung it by the door, and poured 2 mugs of coffee from a kettle he'd set over the stove. No words, just the gentle clink of metal and the soft murmur of fire. He handed her a cup, his hand steady, his eyes calm. "You'll sleep in the loft," he said. "Sheets are clean. You need more, I'll find them." Abigail nodded, fingers wrapping around the warm tin. "I don't cook much anymore," she said after a moment. "Wasn't needed." "Then we'll burn things together till it tastes right," he replied, with the ghost of a smile. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. No man had spoken to her like that in years, like she wasn't broken, just human. She explored the cabin slowly. The loft held a narrow bed with a worn quilt and a carved wooden chest at the foot. Dust clung to the corners, but the space felt lived in, not abandoned. From the small window she could see a field stretching west, dotted with fence posts, and the shadow of a broken wagon. She unpacked the few things she had. Mostly nothing. A hairbrush, a torn scarf, and the crumpled letter the doctor had written with the word infertile scrawled in ink like a verdict. She nearly threw it in the fire, but didn't. Not yet. Downstairs, Samuel moved like a man who had long ago made peace with his ghosts. He didn't ask questions. He didn't pry. But when she returned to the firelight, he offered her a bowl of stew and said, "Eat slow. It's hotter than it looks." She did, and it was. Later she found him outside, repairing a fence post beneath the moonlight. "You built all this yourself?" she asked. He glanced up. "With her, before the fever." A long silence passed. "I'm sorry," she said. He shrugged once. "Grief doesn't make a man. What he builds after does." Abigail looked toward the coupe in her memory. And if a woman didn't get to build anything? Then she starts now. He stood, wiping his hands on his trousers. "You want this place to be yours too, Abigail?" She stared at him, the stars flickering above. "I don't know how to start." "Then we'll learn it together." The wind shifted. It didn't bite this time. It carried the scent of wildflowers. Abigail had never been touched gently outside a doctor's office, and even then it had felt clinical, cold, something meant to confirm her worst fears rather than soothe them. So when Samuel brushed past her shoulder one morning, just a graze, reaching for the kettle, she flinched. Not from pain, but from memory. He noticed. Of course he did. But he didn't apologize or pull away like others might. He simply slowed his movement, giving her space to breathe. "You okay?" he asked quietly. "Just startled?" she murmured, eyes fixed on the rising steam. "It happens." "You don't owe me silence," he said. "Or steadiness, or anything." She turned to him. "You gave me a place to stand. That's already more than most men have offered without expecting something in return." He didn't answer, just nodded once and set 2 plates of cornbread on the table. That day she helped him in the field for the first time. Her hands blistered fast, soft from months of nothing but sweeping coops and hiding from daylight. But she didn't complain. She wanted to earn this steadiness, to plant something in soil that didn't spit her out. They worked in silence, fixing posts, hauling rope, clearing a fallen branch. Midday sun baked the earth, and Abigail pulled her sleeves up. That's when he saw it, a long, jagged scar running from her elbow to her wrist. It was healed, but angry-looking. Samuel didn't speak, but he paused. She noticed. Her arms tensed. "It wasn't from a fall," she said. "My husband, years back, I dropped a jar of peaches. That was his temper." Samuel didn't ask anything, didn't try to console her. Instead, he said, "Do you want salve for the blisters?" It was the kindest answer she could have imagined. No pity, no weight, just acknowledgement. That night, she couldn't sleep. The loft felt warm, safe, but her body still remembered cold floors and chicken wire. So she came down quietly, found him sitting on the porch, watching the moon. "You always sit in the dark?" she asked. "I don't think of it as dark," he said. "Not anymore." She sat beside him. "I didn't know how much I needed to be seen, not judged, just seen." "Then stay seen," he said. "As long as you want." Abigail didn't reply. She just rested her hand, gently, slowly, on his. He didn't move, didn't shift. He just let her. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel hollow. She felt held. It was the sound of hooves that stirred Samuel from the barn, where he'd been sharpening his blade. Abigail stood in the doorway, apron dusted with flour, her hands still coated in dough. "Expecting company?" she asked, her voice quiet but alert. Samuel set the blade down slowly. "No." They both stepped onto the porch just as the rider came into view. A teenage boy with hair like dried wheat and a nervous twitch in his jaw. He didn't wear a badge, but he carried the air of someone sent, not self-guided. The boy dismounted awkwardly and tipped his hat toward Abigail, though his eyes lingered a moment too long on her face. "Ma'am," he said, then to Samuel, "You Wren?" "Depends who's asking." "Name's Cody Blake. I work feed runs for Amos Carter, down Millstone Way." Abigail stiffened. Her fingers curled against the wood railing. The boy noticed. "Word is," he continued, "the lady who disappeared from the coop might be out here. Just checkin'. Boss wants her found. Says she left owing him dignity and debt." Samuel didn't move, didn't blink. "Tell your boss she left with neither in his hands." The boy chuckled, uncertain. "He says she was his wife." "Then he should be ashamed to speak of her," Samuel said flatly. Cody shifted. "I was told to bring her back, or send word she's here." Abigail stepped forward then, flour still on her hands, her voice clear as frost. "You'll do no such thing." Cody blinked, clearly rattled by her presence. "Ma'am, I'm just a rider. I don't mean harm." "Then ride on," she said. "Because if Amos wants to see me, he'll have to crawl through every mile of shame he left behind." Samuel took a step closer, looming now. "She's not a prisoner here, but she's not alone either, understand?" The boy nodded quickly, backing toward his horse. "Yes, sir, I'll tell him she ain't here. I never saw nothin'." He mounted and rode off in a panic, kicking up dust behind him. Abigail didn't move until the sound of hooves faded completely. "He'll come," she said. "Not yet," Samuel replied. "Men like him need time to build the courage to face what they've broken." "And when he does?" she asked. Samuel turned to her, calm as ever. Then I won't be the only one standing in his way. Abigail exhaled slowly. She'd spent years thinking her voice held no power. But today, it had sent a boy running. And that, too, was a kind of beginning. The next morning, Abigail rose before the sun. She kneaded dough with more muscle than grace, her arms sore from fence work, and her thoughts restless from Cody's visit. The scent of yeast and ash mingled in the kitchen as the bread oven warmed. She hadn't baked in years, not since Amos had declared it a waste of flour when no children came to eat it. But today, the silence of Samuel's home felt like permission. She placed the loaves inside just as Samuel entered from the barn, sleeves rolled and dust streaking his collar. He paused, watching her. I heard your hands before I saw you. I needed to do something that didn't feel like hiding, she said. Bread is honest. If it rises, it rises. If not, no one's to blame but me. Samuel leaned against the frame. It'll rise. You've got heat in you now. The words startled her, not because they were romantic, but because they were true. She did feel heat again, not shame, not rage, just life. They ate in silence, the crust warm and thick. Samuel made a low sound of approval with the first bite. It's been a long time since I tasted bread that didn't come from a trade post, he said. Then it's your lucky day. But just as her smile settled, a crack rang out from outside. Gunfire. One sharp shot. Then silence. Samuel stood so fast his chair toppled. Abigail rushed to the window. No rider, no horses, just smoke. From the side barn. Samuel grabbed his rifle. Stay inside, he said. No, she snapped. If he's here, we end it together. They rushed out to find the side barn already ablaze, flames climbing the dry boards. A message was nailed to the fence. She was never yours to keep. Abigail read it once. Then again. Then she tore it down with shaking fingers. It's him, she said. It's Amos. Samuel was already tossing water at the flames, trying to contain the spread. Abigail grabbed a bucket without thinking, joining him. They fought together until smoke filled their lungs, and the side barn crumbled inward. When it was over, she collapsed to her knees. I brought this here. Samuel knelt beside her, gripping her shoulder. Number he did, and he'll answer for it. She met his eyes. How? He stood slowly. By seeing that you're not the woman he locked away anymore. And if he tries to do it again? Then this time, Samuel said, voice steel, he won't walk away. The wind carried ash across the field, but Abigail didn't feel cold. She felt ready. He arrived just before dusk, riding slow like a man rehearsing forgiveness. Amos Carter wore the same black coat he'd worn to their wedding, cleaned, pressed, and still too tight across the shoulders. His hair had thinned, but his pride hadn't. He dismounted without a word, boots stirring dust that hadn't been touched since last season's rain. Abigail stood on the porch beside Samuel, hands folded, shoulders square. She didn't flinch when Amos looked at her. But he did flinch, just slightly, when he realized she was no longer hunched, no longer silent. Abigail, he said, offering a faint smile. You look, well. I am, she said. Despite you. His eyes flicked to Samuel, then back. Came to take you home. Thought maybe you'd had your say. Samuel stepped forward. She is home. Amos raised an eyebrow. You a preacher now? No, Samuel said. Just a man who doesn't keep women in cages. The insult didn't land like a slap. It landed like a nail, slow and final. But Amos tried to smooth it over. She was sick. The doctor said, The doctor didn't tell you to lock me up, Abigail snapped. He told you we couldn't have children. You made that a sentence. Amos took a breath, held it like a bluff. You're my wife. I was your wife, she corrected. You gave that up when you turned me into a ghost behind the chapel. He looked to Samuel, like he expected backup from man to man. But Samuel's eyes were flint. You came here to burn a barn, he said. You came here to send boys with threats. Don't pretend this is about love. Amos's face tightened. What do you want, Abigail? An apology? I've said the words. I brought you clothes, food. You brought me nothing but shame, she said, her voice cold but clear. And now I know what life feels like without it. For a moment, no one spoke. The sky burned orange behind them, and the wind stilled. So that's it? Amos asked. You belong to him now? Abigail stepped forward, past Samuel, standing just inches from the man who had made her disappear. I don't belong to anyone, she said. But if I choose to stay here, it's because I was asked, not ordered. She looked back once, and Samuel met her gaze without question, only understanding. You should leave, she told Amos. You won't find what you're looking for here. Amos stared, jaw clenching, but he turned, got on his horse, and rode. Not once did he look back. Abigail exhaled, not because she feared him, but because she didn't anymore. That night, long after Amos had vanished down the ridge trail, Abigail sat at the edge of the porch, fingers wrapped around a worn piece of muslin. It was the last scrap from a quilt she'd started years ago, back when she still believed that making a home meant preparing for children who'd never come. She had sewn half of it before the doctor's verdict drained her of hope. After that, the fabric stayed folded in a drawer, until today. Samuel stepped outside, carrying 2 mugs of tea, and sat beside her without speaking. She held up the fabric, letting the moonlight reveal its faded reds and dusty blues. I started this when I was 22, she murmured. Each square meant something. Strength, grace, joy. But after Amos... She shook her head. I forgot what the pieces were supposed to say. Then sew new meaning into them, Samuel said simply. You don't have to remember what they were, only what they are now. Abigail smiled faintly. What if I've changed too much to finish it? Then it'll be the truest thing you've ever made. They sat in silence, the warm weight of his words settling around her like a second quilt. Finally, she asked, Why did you really come for me that day, Samuel? What did you see in me? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked toward the field where the barn once stood, now a black scar beneath the stars. After my wife died, people left pies at my door for a while. They said kind things, prayed, talked of healing, but no one stayed. No one looked me in the eye without pity. He turned to her then. Until I looked through a slat in a chicken coop and saw a woman who wasn't asking to be rescued, just seen. Her throat tightened. You think I'm still that woman? I think you've outgrown her, he said, but you still carry her backbone. Abigail looked down at the fabric in her lap. It wasn't whole, but it was something. A start. I'd like to sew again, she whispered, not for what's missing, for what survived. Samuel nodded. Start with that piece. I'll sit with you while you work. Even if I prick my fingers and curse, especially then. She laughed quietly, and for once the sound didn't feel borrowed. It was hers. The fire inside the house crackled, and the night held no ghosts, only the steady breath of a new life. One that wasn't waiting to begin, one already underway. The next morning brought a crisp breeze, and a stranger on horseback, this time not with malice, but with a satchel of papers and the dust of long travel on his coat. He rode straight up to the porch where Samuel was mending a bridle, and Abigail was hanging laundry. Morning, the rider greeted. Name's Willis, clerk from Millstone. I'm here about property claims." Samuel stood, cautious. "We didn't file anything." "No, sir," Willis said, dismounting. "But someone else did. A man by the name of Amos Carter submitted a claim that Abigail Carter abandoned her marital rights and left her legal residence. He's requesting her return, or compensation." Abigail froze, her fingers tightening around the clothespin. "So he means to sell me," she said flatly. Willis looked uncomfortable. "That's not how the law phrases it, ma'am, but yes, he's trying to reclaim ownership of your name." Samuel's voice was steady but cold. "She's not property." "I agree," Willis replied, pulling out a folded paper. "Which is why I'm here. Quiet word is, the circuit judge is due in Fort Wren in 4 days. If Abigail files her own declaration, separating her identity from his, this claim falls apart. Permanently." Abigail stepped forward. "You came all this way just to warn me?" "I buried a sister who never got that warning," Willis said. "She ran from a man like Amos, got caught before she could reclaim herself. I swore I'd never let another woman disappear in ink if I could help it." For a moment, none of them moved. Then Abigail reached for the paper. "What do I sign?" "You don't," Willis said. "You ride with me. Present it in person. You speak it." Samuel turned to her. "It's your call." Abigail didn't hesitate. "We ride at dawn." That night she sat by the fire, brushing Ruth, the name she'd given her unfinished quilt, now halfway stitched. Samuel brewed tea. He looked over. "You scared?" "Not of the ride, not of Amos." She looked up. "I'm scared of hearing my own voice in a courtroom, of it cracking." "Then let it crack," he said. "Let it crack and ring out anyway." Abigail took a breath. "If I change my name, it'll be the first time I've chosen it." Samuel leaned forward. "You can choose anything now. The land, the work, even the man who waits when the storm passes." She didn't answer with words. She simply placed her hand over his and left it there. Warm, steady, real. Outside, the wind shifted again, no longer carrying soot or fear, just the promise of something legal and lasting. The courthouse in Fort Wren was nothing more than a plank building with a bell and a crooked sign, but to Abigail, it looked like a mountain. She stepped inside with her chin high, Samuel at her back like a shadow of strength, and Clerk Willis guiding the way. The judge was old, tired-looking, with eyes that had seen too many land disputes and too few reckonings. He took the paperwork and glanced it over. "Mrs. Carter, you understand this declaration severs all legal ties to your husband. You will no longer be entitled to anything registered under his name, land, earnings, protections." "He offered me none of those things," Abigail replied, voice steady. "He gave me a cage." The judge raised a brow but said nothing. "You wish to submit a new surname?" She hesitated for a beat, then said, "Abigail Ruth Wren." Samuel turned to her, startled. She didn't look at him, but the edges of her mouth twitched with something like defiance. "He saved me," she added, "but I chose the name. It's mine now." The clerk smiled. The judge stamped the paper. "So noted." It was done in moments, but the weight of it followed her outside like a sunrise. On the porch of the courthouse, Abigail stood in the light and inhaled like it was the first clean breath of her life. "You didn't have to take my name," Samuel said gently. "I know," she replied, "but I liked how it sounded when I earned it." He touched her wrist. "Then let's build something with it." They returned to the ranch with the wind at their backs, and no more riders trailing behind. Samuel finished the new barn by midsummer. Abigail finished the quilt by autumn. And when winter came, they sat beside a fire with warm mugs, sharing silence that wasn't hollow. A letter came once, unsigned but unmistakable. Amos had left Millstone for good. No forwarding trail. No threats. Just absence. Abigail burned it without ceremony. "He was never the end of me," she said. "Just the middle." On a cold evening in February, Samuel carved her name into the porch beam. A R. Wren. "You sure?" he asked. "It's carved deep." She smiled. "So am I." They stood together in the doorway of the home they had both fought for, one with no cages, no locked doors, and no silence left to fear. And for the first time in her life, Abigail felt not just safe, but chosen. On her terms. In her name. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Stories Left Behind. If you had seen her there, would you have stepped in too? Tell us in the comments.